On September 6, 1522, a man by the name of Juan Sebastian Elcano arrived in Spain on a ship called the Victoria. All in all, the ship had a smallish crew of about 18 people on it. And its arrival kind of rocked the world. Why? What was so special about this ship? Well, almost about exactly 3 years earlier, it was part of a fleet of 5 ships. The Trinidad, San Antonio, Conception, Santiago, and of course, the Victoria. The fleet had originally been captained by Ferdinand Magellan before his eventual death in the Philippines. The Victoria had arrived from the east by sailing to the west, and the Victoria was the only part of the fleet to make the full trip around Earth. Here's a picture of their route, by the way. Now, the Victoria's voyage was really exciting because it proved that trade routes could be made to the Far East by sailing to the west. But it also did something else. It answered a question that had been pondered in the public discourse for years. That question? Is the world flat? Magellan's fleet accidentally answered this question once and for all. The answer is no. The world is in fact round and is most likely a globe. The answer is now settled and we can all go home now. Or is it? In recent years, a cultural movement has grown up and is slowly gaining traction, especially online, called the Flat Earth Movement. This movement is filled with people who have a sincerely held belief that the Earth is not a globe, but rather is flat. No, they sincerely believe this. Now, a reasonable person might ask, do these people have a good argument? Like, is there strong evidence to believe the Earth is flat? No, absolutely not. There is overwhelming evidence that the Earth is in fact a globe and not flat. How overwhelming? Like, really, really overwhelming. The evidence is so overwhelming, in fact, that despite the fact that we have talked a lot about the evidence for the globe in this introduction, we're not really going to focus on this question in the video. Sure, some evidence for whether or not the Earth is flat will inevitably sneak in, but it's not really going to be our main focus. Our main focus will be a slightly different, more perplexing question. That question? How? How is it that something with such overwhelming evidence against it ever became mainstream and popular in the first place? And that is what we're going to be talking about on this episode of Culture Reforged. Roughly 300 BC, a philosopher by the name of Aristotle wrote a book, well, actually a set of books, called On the Heavens. These books can be best described as the philosophy of astronomy. In normal talk, that just means he was thinking really hard about outer space. Now, in this book, he wrote something quite interesting. We need not be troubled by the question arising from the spherical shape of the Earth, how there can be a distinction of right and left within it, all parts being alike, and all forever in motion. We must think of the world as of something in which right differs from left in shape, as well as in other respects, which subsequently included a sphere. Now, for reference, he's talking about the Pythagoreans here. Yeah, the right triangle guys. Apparently, in addition to studying right triangles, they also had a belief that only left and right existed and not, say, up and down or forwards and back. So he's basically saying, guys, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There are other directions that exist. Now, the Pythagoreans aren't really the point here. Notice how he talks about the spherical shape of the Earth. He takes it for granted here, and takes it as a given. That's because, by the way, in Aristotle's time, it was kind of just taken as a given that the Earth was round. Where exactly did this idea come from? Well, it's hard to say exactly where it came from, but the answer is possibly the Pythagoreans. Now, the Pythagoreans aren't the only possible explanation. They just simply are one explanation. We have several ancient Greek writers, actually, that say something along these lines. Not just the Pythagoreans. Now, later Greeks after Aristotle actually even conducted experiments that confirmed that the Earth was in fact round. So basically we've known this for quite a long time, and in case there was any doubt, especially in the public's eye, Magellan's voyage sealed the deal once and for all. Yet, with all of this evidence, we still haven't really begun answering our question yet. if most people knew that the Earth was round for thousands of years, where exactly did the idea of the Earth being flat come from? The modern ideas of the flat Earth was started by a guy named Samuel Robotham. In roughly the 1800s, Robotham began writing pamphlets and books under the pen name Parallax. I should note that I have resisted the urge to insert a joke about the DC Comics character Hal Jordan here, since this is immediately where my mind went to when I found out his pen name was Parallax. Though I resisted the urge, apparently I'm still mentioning him anyway, so my resistance, I guess, didn't work all that well. Anyway, back to the other Parallax. Robotham was a speaker of sorts, who had all sorts of speaking engagements and stuff. He also started writing pamphlets and books. His books claimed that the North Pole was actually at the center of the world and that Antarctica was actually an ice wall. And apparently, his books kind of just took off. After his death, several of his friends began a Flat Earth Society and continued his work after his death. Now, all of this is kind of interesting, but it actually has little to do with the modern movement. See, while Robotham can be credited with the modern idea of a flat Earth, his work kind of just fizzled out. Okay, so it never really fully went away, but it was largely forgotten. But that leads into another question. Why has it grown today? I mean, sure, the actual claims Robotham was making have obvious connections to what some flat earthers believe today. This still doesn't speak to why people believe it today. So why is that? The modern flat earth movement is usually credited with rising up with the advent of social media and YouTube. As far back as 2017, various flat earth conventions started popping up across the world, and several YouTube channels related to flat earth began coming online. Pretty soon, the modern flat earth movement was born. Now, I know what you're thinking. What exactly was the academic world doing while all this was happening? Well, the answer is kind of sad, actually. The answer is nothing. Well, not really nothing, but they didn't really engage publicly, repeatedly, or at any scale, really. And that was, in effect, the same as nothing. You see, academics could have easily refuted this idea very quickly before it got off the ground. Instead, they just laughed. They laughed because the whole thing is ridiculous. Like, completely ridiculous. So they largely said nothing. Meanwhile, the popularity continued and continued to grow. And yes, the academics continued to say nothing. Where they did say something, it was largely dismissal and treating it like pseudoscience and fringe theory. Because it was. It largely was a fringe theory. Pretty soon, though, it stopped being a fringe theory. It became a movement. In fact, according to the study from 2021, 10% of Americans think the Earth is flat. 10%? That's a shockingly high number, especially for something that has quite the stack of evidence against it that the flat Earth has. Apparently, 10% of people in the United States say, yeah, but it's still flat though. Now, there are many, many people dedicating whole YouTube channels to refuting flat Earthism. But now it's sort of too late. The movement has picked up steam, and a startling amount of people believe the Earth is flat. So, what's the moral of the story? Well, it's this. See, the thing is, when this first started trending online, it was really easy to say that, no, the Earth isn't flat. Here's why. However, that's not what happened. Instead, people decided to be silent, and in fact, they even began to scoff. You know, I've observed several debates over the years, and there's something that I've noticed. Anytime that one side is stunned into silence, it's usually not good for them. Why? Well, the reason is that oftentimes, even if someone has a good argument for their position, but they just can't figure out the right words in the moment, it's usually not received that way. Instead, many times when a debater is stunned into silence, the audience watching the debate takes it as the inability to come back in a meaningful way. And the reason they typically assign to that is because your argument is weak. You're not responding because you have nothing to say that can refute your opponent. Now, that's obviously not always the case. Sometimes you're choosing not to respond because you think they're being outrageous or whatever. But that's not typically how the audience perceives it. Now, this is often true in debate, but it's also true online as well. The truth is, in public discourse, if you don't say something or respond to something, people will think that you can't. They'll think that you have nothing to refute it. Or they think that you're hiding something, that you don't want them to see the truth because it's not good for you. And you might have tons and tons of things to refute them. But the truth is, no matter how strong your argument is, it's a paper tiger if nobody ever hears it. In the case of flat Earth, many people thought it was crazy and wasn't really worth their time. This led to people assuming that the flat Earth argument had merit, or worse, that there was a massive conspiracy to hide the truth from them. That wasn't really the case, though. There was tons and tons and tons of evidence just waiting to be lodged at flat earthers. However, it didn't matter. Now, a disproportionate number of people believe that the Earth is flat, given the evidence we have to the contrary. And it didn't have to get this far. It could have been largely avoided simply by speaking up in larger numbers, making sure the evidence was shown, and then hopefully going to bed with a clear mind. Now it's a significant cultural movement, and it's harder to stop it from gaining steam. And really, is it all that surprising? I mean, if the only people saying things in large numbers about whether or not the Earth was flat are the flat earthers, it makes a degree of sense that the movement grew to what it is today. So now, what can we learn from this? Well, I think there are a couple of important things to note. Number one, speak up. Whenever there's a topic, particularly in public discourse, it's always a good idea to speak up about it. This is true even if you don't necessarily think that it needs to be said. Say it anyway, and make sure that it is said. If you don't, people will think that you have nothing to say defending your side. Solid arguments have no power if you never use them. Number two, don't abandon the subject. You know, when flat earthers started gaining steam, I think way too many people left it alone because they thought it was silly. Yet now, it's become a much bigger problem precisely because people largely left it alone. The truth is, we abandoned the issue. Now, it's grown to become a bigger issue as the only voices on the shape of the Earth were the flat earthers. That made it sort of an echo chamber because nobody was arguing against them. Instead, we should have spoken up, and we should have spoken up louder and in larger numbers. You can't effectively abandon the world and get surprised when it doesn't look like how you want it to. Number three, the Earth is not flat. And yes, in case you were wondering, no, the Earth is not flat. Here's a picture of it from space taken by the Japan Meteorological Agency, an arm of the Japanese government, totally organizationally independent of NASA, with no reason to collude with NASA and lie to you about the shape of the Earth. And with that, thanks for watching.